Sodom was not the most condemned city in the Bible. It was the city where Jesus lived. Yes, you heard right. Capernaum, the place where he slept, where he ate, where he taught every week, received from his own mouth a sentence more severe than the one that fell on Sodom. In the next few minutes, you're going to discover the real reason behind those words. And at the end, I'm going to show you an archaeological finding, buried for centuries in one of those condemned cities, that seems to answer stone by stone the exact words he spoke. Stay with me, because this story has 3 layers, and almost no one knows the third. Today, on the northern shore of the Sea of Galilee, there's a field of black ruins, volcanic basalt, dark as coal, devoured by dry grass, fallen columns, thresholds that no longer lead to any house. The wind comes down from the hills, crosses the stones and keeps going toward the water. There's no market, no voices, no nets drying in the sun, only the silence. And that silence weighs more than any sermon. That place had a name. It had streets full of fishermen, of children, of arguments over the price of dried fish. And it had something no other city in history had to the same degree. It had Jesus of Nazareth walking its streets almost every day. Here is the mystery we're going to open today. In Matthew 11:20-24, Jesus pronounces a sentence against 3 cities, Chorazin, Bethsaida, and Capernaum. And in that sentence, he affirms something that must have left everyone who heard it frozen, that the day of judgment will be more tolerable for Sodom, the city that burned under fire from heaven, than for them. Before we go on, let me give you 3 clues in advance. First, one of these 3 cities doesn't have a single miracle recorded in the 4 Gospels, and yet Jesus says he did more there than anywhere else. Second, the 2 pagan cities Jesus uses as a favorable comparison had already been condemned by the prophets centuries earlier, and that makes his words even more scandalous than they seem. Third, in the 20th century, archaeologists unearthed in one of these cities a basalt object that connects directly to a phrase Jesus said in another context. When we get there, you're going to understand why this subject keeps me up at night. Before we go on, a quick pact between you and me. I'm going to hand you this complete story with sources and no filler. If by the end you feel it was worth your time, leave me that like of good faith. And if not, no problem. Keep enjoying the video. Deal. Let's continue. All right, to understand the sentence, first you have to understand the setting. And the setting begins with a rejection. In those days, Jesus did not begin his ministry in Capernaum. He began in Nazareth, the town where he had grown up, where everyone knew his face, his trade, his family, and Nazareth rejected him. Luke records that his own neighbors drove him out of the synagogue and took him to the edge of a cliff to throw him off. He himself summed it up with a phrase that became a proverb: "No prophet is accepted in his own land." And Matthew adds the detail that hurts. He did not do many miracles there because of their unbelief. Notice that contrast from the very start, because it's going to come back at the end like a boomerang. Nazareth received little because it did not believe. The 3 cities we're going to talk about received more than anyone, and the result was the same. Matthew 4:13 says that, leaving Nazareth, Jesus came and dwelt in Capernaum, a city by the sea, in the region of Zebulun and Naphtali. He dwelt, he didn't visit it, he moved. He established his base of operations there. And Matthew sees in that move the fulfillment of a prophecy of Isaiah about that exact region. The people who sat in darkness saw a great light. And on those who sat in the region of the shadow of death, light has dawned. The Hebrews had a name for that northern zone: Galil Hagoyim, the circle of the nations, the Galilee of the Gentiles. It was a frontier land, mixed, despised by the religious elite of Jerusalem, crossed by trade routes where Jews, Phoenicians, Greeks, and Syrians met. And it was precisely there, in the least prestigious region of Israel, that the light decided to settle. The epicenter of that light was a triangle of cities on the northern shore of the lake. Scholars call it the evangelical triangle: Capernaum by the water, Bethsaida to the east near the mouth of the Jordan, and Chorazin in the hills about 2.5 miles inland. 3 towns so close to one another that a person could have breakfast in one, lunch in another, and dinner in the third, on foot. Within that small triangle was concentrated the greatest density of divine power that human history has seen. Let's stop on the names, because the names guard a secret. Capernaum comes from the Aramaic Kafar Nahum. Kafar means village. Nahum is a Hebrew proper name that springs from the root that expresses comfort. The same root as the prophet Nahum, the village of Nahum, the village whose name breathed consolation. Hold on to that detail, because when we reach the sentence, you're going to feel the weight of the irony. The city of comfort was the one that received the hardest word. Bethsaida, for its part, comes from the Aramaic Bethsaida, which translates roughly as house of fishing, a name of work, of nets, of hands weathered by the water. John tells us who came out of those nets, and Philip was from Bethsaida, the city of Andrew and Peter. 3 of the 12 apostles were born in that house of fishermen. The city that gave the world Peter was one of the 3 condemned. Think about that for a moment. Imagine an ordinary morning in that triangle in the year 28 or 29 of our era. It's a mental exercise, but built with what we know of first-century Galilean life. The sun hasn't quite finished rising over the mountains of Gadara on the other side of the lake, and the harbor of Capernaum already smells of fish and wet rope. The men unload the night's catch into wicker baskets. A tax collector inspects the goods under a linen awning, because the city was a border post between the territories of Herod Antipas and Philip, and everything that crossed paid a toll. The women grind grain. The children run among the houses of black basalt with roofs of mud and straw. And in the middle of that ordinary bustle, someone points toward the street and says, "Here he comes, here comes the teacher." That scene with variations repeated for months, maybe for a couple of years, because Capernaum was not a stopover for Jesus. Matthew calls it plainly his city. Then Jesus, getting into the boat, crossed over and came to his city. Mark goes so far as to say he was at home there. There, Peter lived with his family, and Peter's house functioned as the headquarters of the movement. There was the synagogue where Jesus taught week after week, a synagogue with a curious history. It had been built with funds from a Roman centurion, a pagan who loved Israel. The Jewish elders said so before Jesus, as Luke records, because he loves our nation and he built us a synagogue. Hold on to that image. An officer of the oppressing empire paying for the walls where the Messiah of Israel would preach. The setting was already loaded with signs before the first miracle happened. And there's one more detail about this city that multiplies the weight of everything you're going to hear. Do you remember the tax collector under the awning in the harbor scene? Mark records that Jesus, passing through Capernaum, saw Levi, the son of Alphaeus, sitting at the booth of public taxes, and said 2 words to him, "Follow me." That collector got up, left everything, and church tradition identifies him with Matthew, the author of the first gospel. In fact, when that same gospel narrates the scene, the one sitting at the tax booth is no longer Levi, it's a man named Matthew. The book quietly keeps the signature of the witness. Stop on what that implies. The man who wrote the sentence against Capernaum was a son of Capernaum. The evangelist knew those streets by heart, knew the neighbors by name, had collected taxes from those fishermen. When Matthew put into writing the woe against his own city, he was not copying a distant rumor. He was recording With his hand trembling or not, we'll never know, the anticipated funeral of the place where his entire life had changed. He was the proof that in that city you could indeed respond to the call. He responded. His city did not, and the miracles happened. Did they ever happen? Mark opens his gospel practically there. The first public act of power he records happens inside the synagogue of Capernaum. A possessed man interrupts the teaching with screams, and Jesus frees him with a single command before the whole congregation in the middle of the Sabbath. That same afternoon in Peter's house, he raises the apostle's mother-in-law, laid low by fever. And when the sun goes down and the Sabbath ends, something happens that the evangelist describes with a phrase that seems exaggerated until you read it slowly. And the whole city gathered at the door. The whole city. Not a few curious onlookers. The entire population of Capernaum pressed against a door, bringing the sick and the tormented, and leaving with them healed. And pay attention to what Jesus did the next morning, because almost no one comments on it. Mark tells that, at dawn, while it was still dark, he got up and went off to a deserted place to pray. When Peter found him and told him everyone was looking for him, the answer was disconcerting. "Let us go to the neighboring towns, so that I may preach there too, for this is why I have come." The whole city was acclaiming him. And he left at daybreak. From the very first night he made it clear he had not come to be the spectacle of Capernaum. The city, as you're going to see, never quite understood that. How many cities in the history of the world can say that their entire population was a direct witness of the supernatural in a single night? That's the question you should keep in mind throughout this whole video. And that was just the beginning. In that same city, 4 men broke through the roof of a house to lower a paralytic on his mat because the crowd wouldn't let a pin through, and the man walked out with the mat on his shoulder. In that same city, the centurion, perhaps the same one who financed the synagogue, sent to ask for his dying servant, and Jesus healed him at a distance without entering the house, astonished, Matthew says, at a faith he had not found in all Israel. And right there, in the middle of that episode, Jesus said something that almost no one connects with our story, and that works like a flash of lightning before the storm. Look closely at the face of this sentence, because it's the first warning. "And I tell you that many will come from the east and the west, and will sit down with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. But the sons of the kingdom will be cast out into the outer darkness." That's how Matthew preserved it. Those outside will enter. Those inside, the ones who had everything, can end up outside. That sentence was pronounced in Capernaum. The city heard it, and the city went on with its nets. The list goes on, and it's worth hearing it complete to measure the privilege. In Capernaum, Jairus, the ruler of the synagogue, saw his 12-year-old daughter come back from death. On the way to that house, a woman who had been bleeding for 12 years touched the edge of his cloak and was healed in an instant. Mark narrates the two scenes interwoven. An official of the king traveled from Cana to plead for his son, who lay dying in Capernaum, and Jesus healed him from more than a day's journey away with a single phrase. John put it in writing. Even the tax money passed through the supernatural. When the temple collectors demanded the tribute, Jesus sent Peter to the lake with an impossible instruction. The first fish that came up would bring in its mouth the exact coin. Matthew records the order with total naturalness, like someone noting the household routine. That too happened in Capernaum. And if you think you've already understood the pattern of this city, wait, because its reaction to the most profound sermon of Jesus was not the one you imagine. It was in the synagogue of Capernaum, the centurions, where Jesus pronounced one of the most profound sermons of his whole life, the bread of life discourse. John says it explicitly. These things he said in the synagogue, teaching in Capernaum. And do you know what the city's response to that sermon was? John himself records it. From then on, many of his disciples turned back, and no longer walked with him. The mass desertion did not happen in Jerusalem among his enemies. It happened in his own city, among his own people, after his most elevated teaching. Only the small core remained, and Peter's voice answering for them all. "Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life." Now let's cross the Jordan to the east, to the house of fishing. Bethsaida also has its catalogue. Near there, in an uninhabited place, 5 loaves and 2 fish fed 5,000 men, not counting women and children. Luke locates the scene near the city. That same night, the disciples were rowing toward Bethsaida when they saw a figure walking on the water in the middle of the storm. Mark tells it. And within the city itself, one of the strangest miracles of the 4 Gospels took place, the only one done in 2 stages. They brought him a blind man. Jesus took him by the hand, led him out of the village, put saliva on his eyes, and asked if he saw anything. The man answered with one of the most enigmatic phrases in the New Testament, "I see men like trees, but I see them walking." That's how Mark recorded it. Then Jesus put his hands on him again, and the man saw clearly. Generations of readers have wondered why that healing was gradual. Whatever the answer, notice the contextual detail. It happened in Bethsaida, and Jesus led the man out of the village before healing him, and ordered him not to go back into it, as if the city no longer deserved to see one more sign. We have the 3rd corner of the triangle left, Chorazin, the one in the hills. And here comes the first revelation I promised you at the beginning, a scene that could have repeated dozens of times, and that I offer you only as an exercise to understand the geography. Think of a farmer of Chorazin at the end of the afternoon, climbing the basalt slope with his yoke of oxen. From those hills you can see the whole lake. Below, less than an hour's walk away, you can see the roofs of Capernaum. His brother-in-law climbs with him and tells him about the paralytic who walked out, about Jairus' girl, about the crowd packed at the door. The farmer listens, nods, says what strange times these are, and goes in to dinner. Tomorrow there's threshing to do. All he had to do was go down the slope. An hour's walk separated him from the kingdom of God in full operation, and the harvest seemed more urgent to him. Multiply that decision by all the evenings of a couple of years, and you'll have the portrait of an entire city saying yes with its head and no with its feet. And now comes the detail that turns Chorazin into a mystery within the mystery. Search in Matthew, search in Mark, in Luke, in John. Go through the 4 Gospels from beginning to end, looking for a single miracle done in Chorazin. 1. You're not going to find anything. Not a healing, not a deliverance, not a single teaching dated in that city. Chorazin appears in the New Testament only in the sentence of condemnation. And yet, Jesus affirms before witnesses that in Chorazin works were done so numerous and so powerful that they would have been enough to bring a pagan city to its knees. Do you realize what that means? It means there were entire weeks, maybe entire months of Jesus' ministry that no one wrote down. Miracles with no chronicler, crowds healed of whom not a single line remains. John confesses it as he closes his gospel in John 21:25. And there are also many other things that Jesus did, which if they were written one by one, I suppose that not even the world itself could contain the books that would have to be written. Chorazin is the living proof of that verse. An entire city saturated with miracles invisible to us, but perfectly visible to the judge. And that brings us to a Greek word that changes everything. When Matthew introduces the sentence, he writes that Jesus began to reproach the cities in which he had done many of his miracles. That's how the traditional translation renders it, many. The Greek term is stronger still. Matthew uses dynamis, works of power, unleashed energies, and adds a superlative, pleistai, the greater part. He doesn't say Jesus did some of his miracles there. He says he did most of them there. The statistical epicenter of the power of God on earth was not Jerusalem with its temple of gold. It was that triangle of fishing villages that today are black stones under the sun. If this story is gripping you as much as it gripped me when I first studied it, subscribe to the channel, because every week we open the scriptures to this depth. 3 cities, most of the miracles, all the evidence a human being could ask for, multiplied and repeated over months before thousands of witnesses. The setting is complete. Now you need to hear what happened on the day patience reached its limit. And to understand that day, first you have to know what provoked it, because the sentence didn't fall from heaven without context. Matthew 11 begins in a cell. John the Baptist, the greatest prophet of the old order, is imprisoned in Herod's fortress, and from the darkness he sends his disciples with a question that bleeds, "Are you the one who was to come, or shall we wait for another?" Jesus answers by pointing to the evidence. The blind see, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised. The evidence, that's the thread that stitches the whole chapter together. And the moment the messengers leave, Jesus turns to the crowd and describes his own generation with a devastating image. They are like children sitting in the marketplace who shout to their companions, "We played the flute for you, and you did not dance. We sang a dirge, and you did not mourn." John came austere as the desert, and they said he had a demon. The Son of Man came eating and drinking with people, and they called him a glutton and a drunkard. Nothing moved them, neither fasting nor feasting, neither thunder nor tenderness. And then, in that exact climate, with John's question still floating in the air, Matthew writes, "Then he began to reproach the cities in which he had done many of his miracles, because they had not repented." Stop here for a second, because what comes next has a literary genre of its own, and if you don't know it, you're going to misread the whole scene. In the Greek of the New Testament, there exists a small word of 2 syllables that the prophets of Israel had turned into an unmistakable sound. Why? The traditional translation renders it as woe. It's not an insult, it's not an outburst. It's the technical cry of the prophetic lament, a mixture of funeral grief and announcement of judgment. The sound made beside the dead, transferred to a city that still breathes. Isaiah used it in a chain against those who join house to house and call evil good. Amos hurled it against those at ease in Zion. When a prophet pronounced that sound over your city, he was not cursing you like someone casting a spell. He was singing your funeral in advance. That is more solemn than a curse and more terrifying. Now listen to the complete sentence, just as Matthew records it. "Woe to you, Chorazin! Woe to you, Bethsaida! For if the miracles that have been done in you had been done in Tyre and in Sidon, they would have repented long ago in sackcloth and ashes." Sackcloth and ashes. In Greek, sakos and spodos, 2 words any first-century Jew understood without explanation. The sakos was a coarse fabric of goat hair, dark, uncomfortable, the clothing of extreme mourning. The spodos was the ash that the penitent threw over his head or sat upon, as if to say, "I am dust, I return to dust, I have no defense." It was the body language of total surrender before God. And Scripture knew a real, gigantic case of a pagan city doing exactly that. Nineveh, the capital of the Assyrian Empire, one of the most feared and bloodthirsty cities of its time. The book of Jonah records it, and the men of Nineveh believed God and proclaimed a fast and put on sackcloth, from the greatest of them to the least. A single foreign prophet with not a single recorded miracle, walking and preaching, and the entire city collapsed into repentance, from the king to the last slave. Jesus himself made that comparison out loud at another moment in the same gospel, and it sounds like a hammer on stone. Matthew 12:41, "The men of Nineveh will rise up in the judgment with this generation and will condemn it, because they repented at the preaching of Jonah, and behold, something greater than Jonah is here." Nineveh responded to a sermon. The evangelical triangle did not respond even to the resurrection of a little girl. And now comes the second revelation I promised you, the one that makes these words even more scandalous. Tyre and Sidon were not neutral cities in the mind of a Jew. They were the Phoenician cities of the coast, pagan to the bone, associated for centuries with the trade in Israelite slaves and with the idolatry that poisoned the northern kingdom. Out of Sidon had come Jezebel, the queen who tried to exterminate the prophets of the living God. Isaiah devoted an entire oracle of judgment to them. Ezekiel devoted 3 consecutive chapters to them, announcing ruin upon Tyre with a detail that makes the skin crawl. In other words, Tyre and Sidon were, in the biblical memory, classic examples of sentenced cities. They were the equivalent of saying today the darkest names in history. And Jesus looks at 2 Jewish fishing towns, 2 towns that kept the Sabbath, that circumcised their children, that recited the Shema every morning, and tells them, those condemned pagan cities would have responded better than you. Therefore, I tell you that on the day of judgment, the punishment will be more tolerable for Tyre and for Sidon than for you. It's possible that among the crowd some looked at one another not fully understanding, and others felt the ground move. It's an exercise of imagination, of course, because the text doesn't describe the reaction. What we do know is that the worst had not yet arrived, because up to here the double woe had fallen on Chorazin and on Bethsaida. The third city was missing. His own was missing, and for it, Jesus didn't even need to repeat the word. He exchanged the lament for a sentence of height and abyss. And you, Capernaum, who are lifted up to heaven, will be brought down to Hades. Every word of that sentence is loaded with dynamite, and I want to diffuse it piece by piece with you, lifted up to heaven. Capernaum enjoyed a privilege no city had ever had. The Word made flesh had his mailing address there. That is being exalted to heaven, not because of its walls or its wealth, but because of its access. And the announced fall uses a precise word, Hades, the Greek term for the world of the dead, the equivalent of the Hebrew Sheol, the region below of silence and shadow, from the highest point conceivable to the lowest point conceivable. If you know your Old Testament, that structure sounds familiar, and it's no coincidence. It's almost a quotation. Isaiah records the lament against the king of Babylon, the tyrant who thought himself divine. You who said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven, on high beside the stars of God, I will raise my throne. And the response of heaven, but you are brought down to Sheol, to the sides of the pit. To ascend to heaven, to be brought down to Sheol. Jesus takes the mold of the oracle against Babylon, the empire that destroyed Jerusalem, and pours it out over the village where he himself dined every night. Those who knew the scriptures must have felt a chill at recognizing the melody, and the final blow is still missing. For if the miracles that have been done in you had been done in Sodom, it would have remained to this day. Therefore I tell you that on the day of judgment, the punishment will be more tolerable for the land of Sodom than for you. Read that sentence again, slowly, because it contains a counterfactual claim that only the judge of all the earth could make. Jesus doesn't say Sodom was less sinful. He says something far more disturbing. He says that Sodom, the proverbial city of evil, the one Genesis describes consumed by brimstone and fire, would have remained to this day if it had seen what Capernaum saw. He knows the heart of cities that have been reduced to salt and ashes for 2,000 years and declares how they would have responded in a scenario that never existed. It would have remained. Sodom was recoverable. It lacked light. It did not have an excess of evil. There's an echo of Genesis hidden in that claim, and it's worth hearing. The night before the fire, Genesis tells, Abraham planted himself before God and bargained for that city like a desperate lawyer. Will you destroy the righteous along with the wicked? Perhaps there are 50 righteous. And he came down to 45, and to 40, and to 30, and to 20, stopping at 10. For 10 righteous I will not destroy it, the Lord answered. 10 people, they were not found, and the city burned. For 2,000 years, that was the last word on Sodom, not even 10. And then Jesus comes and reopens the closed file with a declaration Abraham never dared to dream. With the right evidence, not 10 righteous, but the entire city would have turned. Abraham's bargaining sought righteous people who already existed. Jesus' claim speaks of righteous people who would have been born of repentance if the light had arrived in time. It's the most astonishing rereading of Sodom in all of Scripture, and it came from the lips of the only one who could make it with authority. And if you think you know everything about Sodom, the prophet Ezekiel has a surprise for you. When God himself lists the file of that city in Ezekiel 16:49, the first charge on the list is not the one you're thinking of. Behold, this was the sin of Sodom your sister. Pride, fullness of bread, and abundance of idleness were in her and her daughters, and she did not strengthen the hand of the afflicted and the needy. Pride, bread to spare, comfort, indifference toward the one who suffers. The file of Sodom begins looking less like a horror movie and more like a prosperous city that stopped looking outward. Hold on to that portrait, because in a few minutes you're going to lay it over 3 fishing towns with their nets full, and the resemblance is going to make you uncomfortable. A detail of honesty before we go on, because on this channel we don't hide the seams of the text. This sentence appears twice in the Gospels. Matthew places it here after John the Baptist's question. Luke 10:13-15 records it when Jesus sends out the 70 disciples, and there he adds the generalized version. And I tell you that on that day the punishment will be more tolerable for Sodom than for that city, referring to any city that rejects his messengers. He may have pronounced it on 2 occasions, or an evangelist may have arranged it thematically. Scholars debate both possibilities. What no manuscript debates is the content. The comparison with Sodom came from his lips, and the measuring rod was established forever. Now then, you've heard the complete sentence. It's time to ask the question of the title. Why? What is the real reason 3 pious towns of Galilee ended up beneath Sodom on the scale of judgment? The answer is inside the text itself, and it rests on 2 columns that we're going to raise one by one. The first column is a principle that runs through all of Scripture and that Jesus formulated in his own words in another teaching. It's in Luke 12, and it's worth seeing the complete scene because we almost always quote the conclusion and skip the parable that holds it up. Jesus describes 2 servants who fail at the same thing. Neither did the will of his master. Identical failure, identical master. And yet Jesus says, that servant who, knowing the will of his master, did not prepare nor act according to it, will receive many lashes. But the one who, without knowing it, did things deserving of lashes will be beaten with few. The same act, 2 different sentences. What changed between one and the other? A single variable, how much each one knew. And then the conclusion falls, Luke 12:48. For to everyone to whom much has been given, much will be required. And to the one to whom much has been entrusted, more will be asked. The judgment of God is not a flat scale where all sins weigh the same, regardless of circumstances. It is proportional to the light received. Notice that the very sentence against the 3 cities says it with the precision of a court, more tolerable. It doesn't say Tyre and Sidon will be acquitted, nor that Sodom will be declared innocent. Their oracles of judgment still stand. It says there will be degrees, that the day of judgment will measure not only what you did, but what you did with what you were shown. Under that light, the scandalous ranking of Jesus becomes perfect mathematics. Sodom sinned gravely with little revelation, Not a single resident prophet, not a scripture, not one sign from heaven before the fire. Tyre and Sidon sinned with the indirect revelation of having Israel as a neighbor. Nineveh received a single preacher, and with that minimum, it put on the Sakkos. And the evangelical triangle received the Son of God in person for months, with most of his dynames deployed street by street, house by house. More light than anyone in history. Therefore, more responsibility than anyone in history. The summit of privilege became the summit of the debt. The New Testament confirms the principle without softening it. The second letter of Peter writes it in cold ink. It would have been better for them not to have known the way of righteousness than after having known it to turn back. There is a point at which knowing becomes more dangerous than ignoring. Chorazin, Bethsaida, and Capernaum lived at that point for months. And here the second column rises, the one that answers the question you're probably asking: what exactly did they do wrong? Because if you go through the Gospels looking for the offense of these three cities, you're going to find a strange void. They didn't stone Jesus. They didn't expel him like Nazareth. They didn't hand him over like Jerusalem. There's no record of hostility. The crowds followed him, listened to him, brought him their sick, were astonished. And that's precisely the point. The charge in the file is not a verb they did. It's a verb that was missing. The text names it because they had not repented. In Greek, the verb is metanoio, from which comes metanoia, and its meaning is deeper than feeling guilt. It means to change the mind, to turn the course, to reorder your entire life around what you've just understood. That was what the signs demanded. A miracle of Jesus was never a spectacle. It was a summons. Every paralytic walking was heaven saying, "The kingdom has arrived, respond." And the three cities found the most polite way of not responding. They applauded. They consumed the miracle like someone consuming a show, commented on it in the marketplace, brought the next sick person, and went back to their nets with their soul intact. Astonishment without conversion. Crowds at the door, and not one Sakkos in the whole city. And here, it's worth refining something, so as not to misread the sentence. The woe fell on cities, not on every soul that lived in them. Within that same condemned triangle, there were people who did respond, and their names hold up half the New Testament. Peter, Andrew, and Philip came out of Bethsaida. Matthew got up from the tax booth of Capernaum. Jairus, the ruler of the sentenced synagogue, fell to his knees at the feet of the teacher. The woman with the flow of blood crossed the crowd, dragging 12 years of shame. The centurion of the synagogue believed with a faith that astonished the Son of God himself. All of them proved that in those streets, metanoia was perfectly possible. You only had to want it. That's what makes the condemnation so grave and so just at the same time. No one will be able to claim that the environment prevented it, because their own neighbors achieved it. The sentence does not describe an inevitable destiny. It describes a majority that saw the same thing Peter saw and decided to stay seated. The judgment on the city measures the collective response. The individual door remained open until the end, and some crossed it. Now go back to the portrait of Sodom, according to Ezekiel. Pride, bread to spare, comfort, eyes closed to the needy. 3 prosperous fishing towns, with the lake full, the synagogue new, and the Messiah doing miracles for free every week, had all the ingredients to repeat the recipe. The abundance that lulls to sleep. The blessing turned into routine. There came a point when the light itself became habit. Having Jesus in the city was simply what Tuesdays were normally like. That is the real reason, and it's worth saying it in full. They were not condemned worse than Sodom for doing something worse than Sodom. They were condemned because they received infinitely more and responded exactly the same, with the heart unmoved. The measure of the judgment was not their wickedness, it was their wasted light. I want to ask you a question, and I'm truly interested in your answer. So write it in the comments when this sentence ends. Why do you think that nearness to the sacred, instead of igniting the heart, so often goes on putting it out until it leaves it immune? I read you. And while you write, let me tell you the end of the story, because these three cities have an epilogue, and it's the epilogue that made me choose this subject. An honest clarification first, because this channel owes itself to the truth. When Jesus pronounced the woe, he spoke of the day of judgment, a future and final tribunal. He was not dictating an order of immediate demolition, nor do the Gospels present the sentence as a prophecy of physical ruin with a date. What I'm going to tell you now is later history, documented by archaeology, and each person can decide how much echo they hear in it. I'm only going to put the facts on the table for you. In the following centuries, the region lived through the Jewish wars against Rome, the displacement of populations, the changes of trade routes, and in the year 749 after Christ, a devastating earthquake that struck the whole area of the valley. The three cities of the triangle declined until they went out. Today, none of the three exists as a living city. Not one. Capernaum, the one exalted to heaven, was reduced to an archaeological field. When the excavators brought it out of oblivion, they found something extraordinary. A synagogue of white limestone from the 4th or 5th centuries, raised exactly on top of black basalt foundations that the Franciscan archaeologists attribute to the 1st century synagogue. That is, beneath the white building that pilgrims photograph today are, according to that identification, the stones of the hall where Jesus pronounced the bread of life discourse. A few meters away, a humble 1st century house that later generations surrounded with walls, transformed into a meeting place and finally crowned with an octagonal church. Ancient Christian tradition points to it as the House of Peter, and over it in modern times a temple was built suspended in the air, held up by pillars so as not to touch the ruins. The city died. The memory of what happened in it could not die. Bethsaida, the house of fishing, poses an enigma to this day. The Jewish historian Flavius Josephus tells in his Antiquities that the Tetrarch Philip elevated it to the rank of a city and renamed it Julius in honor of the emperor's family. After that, its trail is lost in such a way that modern archaeologists still argue over where exactly it was. Two rival excavations, one at the Mound of Et Tel and another by the shore at El Araj, claim to be the true Bethsaida, and the debate remains open in the academic journals. Think about it. The city that gave 3 apostles to the world was so erased from the map that we don't even know with certainty where to put the sign. And Chorazin remains. The city with no recorded miracles holds the most unsettling piece of this whole video. Its ruins are known as Khirbet Karazeh in the basalt hills above the lake. There, the archaeologists unearthed the remains of a synagogue of black volcanic stone, built in the centuries after the New Testament, with carved columns and worked reliefs, a sign that the city went on being prosperous for a while longer before going out. And in the year 1926, among those ruins, an object appeared that left the excavators looking at one another. A ceremonial seat carved from a single block of basalt, with a backrest and an inscription in Aramaic engraved on the front. The specialists identified it immediately because they knew the name of that type of seat from a very specific source. They knew it from Jesus. Matthew 23:2. In the seat of Moses sit the scribes and the Pharisees. The seat of Moses was the seat of honor of the synagogue, the throne of stone from which the teacher of the law taught the words of Sinai with authority. For centuries, it was barely a phrase in the gospel, and one of the most famous and best preserved examples that archaeology has recovered appeared precisely there, in Chorazin, in the city of the woe. The city that had before it the one who is greater than Moses preserved, intact beneath its rubble, the empty seat of Moses, as if the stones had wanted to leave a record of exactly what the problem was. They had the seat. They had the law. They had the teaching memorized. What never rose from that city was a response. If you know someone who has spent years listening and never responding, share this video with that person today. Sometimes a story reaches where sermons do not. I'm not going to tell you that this is a prophetic fulfillment because I already explained to you that the text points to the final tribunal, not to a collapse with a date. What I'm going to tell you is what any visitor can verify today with their own eyes. Chorazin, ruins. Bethsaida, ruins in dispute. Capernaum, ruins under custody. And now cross the border to the north toward the coast of Lebanon. Tyre exists, Sidon exists, the two cities the prophets pointed to, the two that Jesus used as an example of comparatively favored paganism, are today living cities with harbors, markets, schools, children playing in the streets. They have suffered wars, conquests, and terrible historical judgments over the centuries, exactly as their oracles announced. None of this paints them innocent. And yet, there they are, breathing, while of the evangelical triangle, not one inhabited village remained to inherit the name. Let the one who has ears draw his own conclusions in silence. Do you remember the boomerang I threw at the beginning? Nazareth rejected Jesus to his face, with violence pushing him toward a cliff, and Nazareth exists today. It's a city full of people, of traffic, of life. The three cities that never attacked him, that listened to him gladly and brought him their sick, disappeared. If the judgment of God worked the way our intuition works, we would expect exactly the opposite. Hostility seems worse than applause. Before heaven, it isn't always. Nazareth lacked light because of its unbelief, and that limited its debt. The triangle had an excess of light and let it pass by. In the accounting of eternity, the declared enemy may be less lost than the unmoved admirer. And that brings me to you. I'm not going to close this video with a list of applications because this story doesn't need a list. It needs a mirror. In the 1st century, being a neighbor of Capernaum was the maximum privilege possible. Having the word 3 streets from your house. Today, that map has changed. You have what no inhabitant of Chorazin ever had. The 4 complete Gospels, the entire Old and New Testaments, 2,000 years of testimony, the finished story with the resurrection included, and all of that in your language, in your house, in the palm of your hand. A fisherman of Bethsaida saw fragments and had to assemble the puzzle with his life on the line. You can read the assembled puzzle this very night, for free. If the principle of Luke 12:48 is still in force, and Jesus gave no sign that it was temporary, then the uncomfortable question is not how far you are from Sodom, it's how close you are to Capernaum, because the danger of those 3 cities was not atheism. It was nearness without surrender. Hearing the teaching once a week and walking out, commenting on how lovely it was, seeing the evidence and filing it away, feeling the call and answering, tomorrow. The heart does not harden all at once like Sodom under the fire. It hardens little by little, like Capernaum under habit, one ignored miracle at a time, until one day, the voice that once made you tremble becomes one more sound of the marketplace. In those days, over the hills of Galilee, the Son of Man pronounced his Uai and wept a funeral for 3 cities that thought themselves alive. The black stones beside the lake are still there, silent, waiting for someone to pass by. Look at them and understand the sermon they preach without words. Don't ask how much light you've seen. Ask what you did with it the last time it reached you. And if you want to keep pulling on this thread, I'll leave you on the screen the video where we study why Jesus had to come precisely from the tribe of Judah, the lion who in Revelation appears as a lamb, the other face, the face of hope, of the same judge who pronounced these woes. See you there.